Yo tengo el honor de hacerle la primera pregunta al señor Woody Allen, que lo amamos con todo nuestro corazón, lo recibimos con todo nuestro cariño. Yo quiero saber si él sabe que en la Argentina su cine es como sagrado. Cuando se estrena una película de Woody Allen, la gente corre a los cines a gozarla.
I'm honored to hear that. I don't know much about what goes on with my films outside of the United States because I've never in my life been south of the border. I've never been to any Central or South American country or north of the border. I've never been to Canada. I've been just to the European countries, and so I'm not really that familiar as to what goes on with my films. Every now and then when I play jazz in the cabaret that I play in, people come over to me from Argentina and from various countries in the world and will tell me that they've seen my film in their country and that they've enjoyed it. But that's usually the only feedback that I get on it, the only information that I get.
Yo creí que él que sabía las cifras. Ahora, yo quiero, todos nosotros tenemos programas de televisión y somos gente muy ocupada. Y cuando nos dijeron, tienen la posibilidad de pasar 2 días en New York, pues, con 15 horas de vuelo para ver a Woody Allen, todos dejamos todo lo que teníamos que hacer. Y para nosotros fue un honor estar acá con Woody, poder conocerlo personalmente y gozar de su talento, ¿no?
No, I'm thrilled. I mean, I'm glad you could come. If you're in town this evening, you know, I will be playing with my jazz band. So yes, because I only play on Monday evenings. So if you guys are not doing anything and want to kill the evening, just let our people know, and we can make arrangements for you to come over and hear some very bad music, but, you know, it may be fun for you. The drinks are good.
Para coronar este viaje, me encantaría entonces si podemos ir y que nos dedique una canción. ¿Cuál le parece a primera impresión que nos dedicaría?
If you're there tonight, we will find some song that will be meaningful to you, because we have a very large repertoire. Again, we're not very good, but we're enthusiastic, and we have a very large repertoire of New Orleans-style jazz tunes. And I'm sure we can find one with a South American motif too.
like a tango or something.
Podría hacer algo de la comparsita, por ejemplo. La comparsita.
I can't play that. That's too complex for me. I use that in my movie because it's an incredibly beautiful song. But I can't. The only songs that I can play are very, very simple traditional jazz tunes, which are mostly 3 chords. And something like La Comparsita would be beyond me. I don't think I could play that well.
¿Cómo usted descubrió esa melodía que fue incluida en una de sus películas y que a los argentinos nos emocionó tanto cuando la escuchamos?
Well, La Comparsita is a song that Americans have grown up with. I mean, I know that song from my earliest years. It's one of the most common, beautiful melodies that you grow up with in this country. It's a classic. And so everybody knows it. You could play it for, you know, for anyone when they're 5 years old, they've heard it. It's extremely well known.
De todos modos, nunca me parece que haya sido mejor aplicada que en el timing de Alice cuando ella viene caminando por la avenida. Tiene exactamente el mismo timing de la comparsita. Es exacto.
Well, that's the fun of making the movie. There's more fun in adding the music than there is in making the movie. You know, once the movie is finished, you know, that's hard work. That's being outdoors and up early in the morning and working long hours, and it's very arduous. But when the whole thing is finished, and I can sit in my editing room and select from the world's greatest music what songs I want to put in, this is a great, great pleasure. And when we heard La Comparsita and tested it against the picture, it was just perfect.
Woody, cuando termina una película, ¿se la muestra a sus amigos? ¿Hace como reuniones a ver qué le parece a cada uno?
Yes, that's exactly what I do. I have a screening room right near here and an editing room combined, And when I finish a film, I have a half dozen people whose opinions I'm very, very interested in, and I show it to them, and I ask them to be very, very frank with me after, you know, were they bored, did they not understand something, did they hate something? I really invite as much negative criticism as I can get, because I don't want people coming in saying, oh, that was wonderful, when in fact it's full of mistakes and they're being polite. And so that's exactly what they do. They come and they watch it and they tell me what they think, and you know, if it makes sense to me, if I hear it from a few people and it seems to be a valid criticism, then I think in terms of making an adjustment in the movie. When I was younger, I was much less secure, and I used to take every film and screen it for maybe 100 people, a big audience, and I would hide in the back. No one would know that I was there, and I would listen to every detail, and I would make my decisions accordingly. But as I got more secure, I've now done about 25 movies. I've shown it to fewer and fewer people, and I found with this little microcosm of this half dozen people, I can pretty much get a good impression of what the general response will be.
Y cuando, perdón, cuando alguien le critica, ¿las críticas lo deprimen?
You mean a personal, private friend or a press?
Los críticos de la prensa.
Well, what I've tried to do in the last 20 years or so is not to read any reviews at all, because in the United States, there's thousands of reviews that come out. Every city, every state has so many of them. And when I first started, and I went in my first movie or two, they would say, here are the reviews, and they would be like this. And one person would love it, and some person wouldn't like it. You know, and finally it got to be such a muddle, you know, it was pointless. So I stopped doing it. Now, I'm sure if I read reviews that were negative, I'm sure it would depress me. And I'm sure to read positive ones would elate me. Yeah. But it's better if you don't, you know, in the Hemingway novel, The Green Hills of Africa, he says that if you believe the critics when they say you're wonderful, you're obliged to believe them when they say you're terrible. And the best thing to do is not to think about that, to just keep your nose to the grindstone and work. And just work. And if you keep working, everything seems to take care of itself. You know, if you work hard and don't think about how wonderful your last movie was or how terrible it was or something, it's better just to work and let the reward come from the process of working, you know, not from financial gain, because my movies have never had a very big financial success, and not from any other aspect of it, just the work itself, the pleasure of the distraction of the work, the fact that the work is so difficult that it keeps you from facing up to the real problems of life. That's reward enough, you know.
Perfecto.
Woody, me encantaría saber, las mujeres cuando salimos del cine de ver las películas suyas, sentimos la sensación de alguien que nos conoce profundamente. Es mucho más fácil mostrar el conocimiento que se tiene de las mujeres en la ficción que en la realidad. ¿Por qué es tan fantástica la mirada que hay a través del cine?
Well, first let me say it only exists in film. It's fictional. I grew up in a family with all women, and most of my friends, in fact, just about all of my personal friends are women, and I enjoy writing about women, but I have no special knowledge of them that is of any value to me in my private life. It's only an ability to fictionalize with some skill, but that's all. I just feel more comfortable with the woman's point of view, maybe because my friends are women, and you know, I have a sister, and I had 7 aunts, and then I was always surrounded by women. All my cousins were women. I was the only male in a very, very large family of people. So it's just a natural feeling for me.
Empezó escribiendo
gags, sketches, hasta teatro, y finalmente llegó al cine. ¿El cine era el objetivo al que quería llegar? ¿Era su objetivo final, dirigir? No, I had no interest in film at all. I wanted only to be a playwright for the theater.
Really?
Yes, that's all I cared about was writing for theater. And I started out by writing for television and trying to aim toward writing for the theater. And then I wrote a film script with a friend, and by accident, I got into film. And then I started to pursue it, and I was pursuing it at a moment when film was on the rise as a social force, as a cultural force, and theater in New York was on a decline. So, but I regret that the theater is not more viable in New York, and I have written a few plays, and I have one that I wrote that's being produced in the theater this January. So I still would like to write for the theater, but the theater has changed in New York. It's when I grew up. Ahora acaba de filmar una versión de su primera obra, ¿no? Don't Drink the Water, para TV. Yes, yes. I've done a few things. I finished one film called, in English, Bullets Over Broadway, which is a 1920s comedy that takes place in New York and is is a broad comic film with a serious underside to it. And that will be coming out in the fall. I'm just finishing the color correction of that now. But then for fun, I wanted to try and do a film for television of my first play, the first play I ever wrote, Don't Drink the Water. That was a very bad play, but very successful. It was not a well-written play at all, and we put it on in New York, and people came and laughed, and they didn't care that it was not good, and it ran for years in New York. Then somebody bought it, this was, 25 years ago, and made it into a film, which I never saw, but I heard was just terrible, absolutely terrible. And I thought that it would be fun to try and make it into a little movie for television. What I didn't understand was that normally when I have a scenario for a movie, I get 3 months to film it. And, I can do it properly. On television, you get 3 weeks. And I couldn't believe it when they told me I was going to have 21 days to film it.
Usted prácticamente en estos 30 años no se ha detenido nunca en filmar, ha tenido un ritmo intenso, ¿sí?
Yes, that's what I do. I once had this conversation with the playwright, Neil Simon, and he said the same thing as I feel about it. You finish a project, and then what? What do you do? That's what we do for a living. So I don't know what to do after I finish the project, so I can rest for a day or two, or a week. I get bored, and I start on another. And that's what he does, and I wouldn't know what else to do. If I wasn't making films, I would start writing a play or a book or something, because I don't know what else to do with my time.
Alguien podría pensar que es mejor que filme y que no agarre el clarinete, ¿no?
Oh, yes. People think that I should practice more.
¿Por qué no le gusta filmar fuera de New York? ¿Por qué todo lo hace en New York?
This is strictly, I think, a neurosis of mine. I feel uncomfortable when I'm away from home. So, I live only 2 minutes from this place here, right around the corner. And I like to, sleep in my own bed and eat in my apartment and in my restaurants. And I like to be where my jazz band is. I like to be where I can watch sports, or go to Madison Square Garden and watch basketball. I have my life centered around things. And to go to another place for a week, 3 weeks, that's okay. But when you do a film, the commitment is 6 months or something. You know, you have to do the scouting, the locations, the casting, and then the filming. And so I don't want to find myself in a foreign country and I'll have been there for 2 months and I think I can't go home for another 4 or 5 months.
That's
you know, it's too unnerving for me. So I film here. And it's limiting, it's artistically limiting because, you know, I might have a good idea for some other place, but I usually put that aside and don't do it.
Habló de una neurosis importante en su vida. ¿Cuáles otras marcaría o pondría en importancia?
For me personally, I am claustrophobic. That's a limiting thing. I don't like to go through tunnels. I don't like to ride elevators. I have a difficult time just enjoying things. You know, I like to be working, and I'm not. I don't trust things unless I'm worried. You know, if I wake up in the morning and have an inexplicable feeling of well-being, I'm suspicious. You know, and I think that's too bad. I wish I could enjoy things. I have friends that work and they do a movie, and it's a good movie, and then they relax. They go on a vacation and they play golf. They can enjoy. But I have a problem with that.
¿Levemente hipocondríaco también?
Well, let me clear that up. There's a difference. There's a difference between a hypochondriac and an alarmist. You see, I'm an alarmist. I don't imagine that I'm sick if I'm not. But when I get anything wrong with me, I imagine that it's fatal. You know, so I don't go around thinking, oh, I'm sick, and it's not really a disease. But if I get, you know, something on my finger, I think it's a tumor or something, and go immediately to the worst possible outcome of it. But it's not exactly hypochondriasis. It's something. It's being an alarmist.
Usted ha tenido una infancia de radio y también de cine, ¿sí? ¿Cómo siente que es la infancia de los chicos hoy en la televisión? ¿Cuál es su opinión de la televisión y la relación con los chicos?
Well, in the United States, for the most part, television is very bad. It's you know, what's shown on television is terrible. The medium itself is fine. When I hark back to the radio shows that I listened to that I thought were so wonderful when I was a child, they're pretty foolish when you really listen to them. They were pretty silly. On television in the United States, mostly they have a low standard of things. It's not very good. There are a few things that are interesting, and the medium is a good medium. I mean, there's nothing wrong with it, but the way we use it in the United States, you know, they don't make any use of it. Renata Adler, writing in the New Yorker magazine, said that in the United States, television is not a medium, it's an appliance. And that's really what it is. It's in your kitchen, it's in your, you know, people watch these terrible, terrible things on it. Most of television is insipid.
¿Extraña algo de la época en que era comediante? ¿Extraña el contacto con el público o se siente más tranquilo pudiendo trabajar cerca de su casa?
I don't miss it, or else I would do it again. It was fine then, but arduous in a different way. You know, one had to, I would play every night of the week, 7 nights of the week, and I would then get on an airplane after 3 weeks and fly to another cabaret and play every night and another one. And we played 2 shows every night, and on Friday and Saturday, 3 shows. And I find myself, you know, going on at 9 o'clock at night, at 11 o'clock at night, at 1 o'clock in the morning, you know, and this would go on, you know, for a year and a half with no rest. It was very, very arduous work. So I don't really miss it very much. But when I was doing it, I was younger, and I was able to do it. I don't know how now, in retrospect, I ever could fly to small towns, you know, on little airplanes that be bouncing around, and fly to a small town in a rainstorm, and go out in a cabaret and play to half an audience. You know, it would be not that many people there, and it would be miserable, and I would be sleeping in a motel room, and you know, there were times that I was making such little money that I would go to a city and they'd put me up in a room. It would be such a terrible room. I would spend my whole salary on a motel room just so I could take a shower. You know, it was not great. I did it when I was younger, but I don't miss it.
En The Sleeper, obviamente en términos de ficción, aparece la posibilidad de que en un futuro el mundo esté gobernado por un solo presidente, un jefe. En la realidad, ¿cree que realmente existe alguna posibilidad de que sea así?
I don't think it can in the foreseeable future. It's conceivable way down the line.
No digo inmediatamente, digo en un futuro realmente.
It's conceivable to me way ahead in the future. I mean, really far, far into the future. It's conceivable that could happen. That because you know, when the United States started, there were separate states. And there was a lot of problems getting them together to form the United States. But they did it. And there was rebellion and there was civil war. But finally, the United States formed as a country and is held together. It's conceivable to me that sometime long, long into the future, the benefits, the cooperative benefits of not the end of nationalism will occur, and that would be a good thing, I think, when nationalism is no more, and one does not consider other countries enemies, but part of your own system of humanity, and that would be a wonderful thing. In my movie, it was not so wonderful, but I think it's potentially very good.
Era maravilloso si uno tenía su propio número de identidad y, por supuesto, venía acompañado del orgamastrón.
I was thinking, sure, without identity numbers and also with there not being any sides, just what would be great to eliminate is sides altogether, and that would be a wonderful thing. I don't see that in the foreseeable future, but that Sleeper took place way, way in the future, but it would be a wonderful thing to think of the world as one entity together and not a group of separate private interests.
Me gustaría saber cuando era chiquito, qué lo hacía feliz, cuáles eran sus ídolos, qué le gustaba, con qué gozaba.
Mostly I enjoyed going to the movies. I didn't go to the theater till I was a teenager, but I loved going to the movies because where I lived in Brooklyn, you know, the reality was not so wonderful. Yeah. And you could spend 25 cents and go into a cinema, and suddenly there in front of you were, you know, pirates and cowboys and penthouses and beautiful women and courageous men and very amusing. You know, it was another world that was wonderful. Unfortunately, not a real world, but absolutely very seductive. And it was great to leave the world of school and problems and walk into the dark of the cinema. Yeah. And they would always show you 2 films, double features. Sí. And for the next 4 hours, you would just be transported somewhere. And I remember to this day the unpleasant feeling in the summertime when it was so hot in Brooklyn when the cinema would be finished, and I would walk out in the afternoon, and inside it was cool and dark and magical, and I'd walk out.
Me gustaría saber, para terminar lo del cine, que lo hacía feliz y todo, ¿quiénes eran sus ídolos? ¿Quién era su actriz preferida y su actor preferido cuando era chiquito?
When I was a little boy, I liked the Marx Brothers very much, Groucho Marx and Harpo Marx, and I liked Humphrey Bogart very, very much, and Cary Grant, and I liked comic films when I was younger, but sophisticated comic films. I liked the films of Lubitsch, for example. Films, I liked any kind of films that took place in New York that were sophisticated, that took place in penthouses, in in evening clothes. I like that kind of. I was not a big admirer of slapstick when I was a child, then when I got older, when I got into my adolescence, World War II ended, 1945. The war ended, and suddenly the United States got foreign films on a steady basis. And in my neighborhood, in those days, cinema was so ubiquitous that in my little neighborhood in Brooklyn, there were 3 foreign film houses. And I could suddenly see the films of, Renoir and Bergman and De Sica and Fellini. And this was a great revelation that these films were so fantastic and so much more interesting than most of the American films. The American film industry made thousands of films, very, very few of them are really good. Most of them are just like television. They're just, they grind them out. But the films that we got from Europe were wonderful. We got only the best that were imported. And so, and this was a big revelation that movies could be art, and they didn't have to just be, the commercial junk that we had been fed for the most part over the years. So that was a big influence for me. I mean, I really love the foreign cinema. I love French, Italian, Swedish movies, German movies, Japanese films. We got very little from south of the border, from Central or South America. We got Buñuel, of course, who was a great, great master. But that's all that we would. That's just, in those years, that's all that we saw of Central or South American movies.
En La Rosa Púrpura del Cairo existía este personaje que vivía en una realidad bastante depresiva y que iba al cine para sentirse mejor. Ahí cumplió el sueño su sueño de mezclar, de que la pantalla saliera y lo metiera a uno en esa ficción. Pero el final era muy trágico, no hay forma de mezclar la realidad con la ficción del cine. ¿Es cierto que quisieron cambiarle el final para que fuera más optimista?
No, they never. I was very lucky from the first day that I worked in the cinema. The first day I had no credentials at all. They always gave me complete control of my films, which was unheard of, and I didn't understand why they did it because I had no background, but they did, and so they never made me change anything ever in any films. Now, when Purple Rose came out, that was a woman, the protagonist. The point of the film, as you just stated, was that, its fantasy is much greater than reality, but you can't pick fantasy because you go crazy. So you have to pick reality. And reality, when you do choose it, hurts you in the end. They saw the film, and they said to me that they could make so much money with the film if I would just put a happy ending on it. But I wasn't going to, and they didn't bother me to. They didn't push me. They just sort of sadly mentioned it in hopes that I would, change it. But I was very lucky. In all my filming, I've always worked for very enlightened studio people, and they never, ever interfered with anything. They could have, but they never did.
Come back, more, come back. Es bastante sorpresivo para el mundo cuál fue la actitud de los Estados Unidos con Nixon. Nixon, que es sacado del gobierno Watergate, y sin embargo, con su muerte es homenajeado y recibe, según la información que tenemos, honores muy particulares. ¿Qué piensa que pasó ahí?
I think America, forgets. They have nothing, they're not serious thinkers in the main. Nixon was I remember Nixon from when I was a teenager, and long before he was president, and those of us who were just children could see even then that he was not an honest person. And we couldn't imagine that anyone would ever take him seriously because he was so, sleaziness kind of oozed out of every pore. I mean, he was just... And then when he became vice president, you know, and then president over the years, governor and then president, you know, we just couldn't believe it. And he was, of course, a dreadful disgrace when he was president, you know, dishonest and you know, immoral and anti-Semitic and just dreadful. And he was forced to leave, or I'm sure they would have impeached him. And now, when he died, people don't think much about it. I think one factor is psychologically that down deep in everybody, in a primitive way, fear of death and hostility toward death is so ingrained that even when a scoundrel dies, they still prefer the scoundrel to the concept of death. And so they still rally behind him as if to say, you know, no matter how bad you are, you're still one of us because you're mortal, and we still prefer you to the alternative. But I don't know. I don't think he was deserving at all of the praise that was heaped on him in his death.
Hablando de la vida y la muerte, en vida usted se dice que usted es un genio. ¿Cómo recibe usted este elogio? ¿Cómo le cae cuando se dice que usted es un genio?
I feel what they really mean subliminally is a show business genius. This is a different story than a real genius. You know, Einstein was a genius. Da Vinci was a genius. Beethoven was a genius. Therefore, those of us in show business, the word genius is used in show business every day. It's, you know, it's like a very common expression. Everybody on every talk show is a genius in comedy, a genius in this, you know, but it's just show business hyperbole, because, you know, if it were true, and if it was true that I was a genius, then what is Beethoven? What is Shakespeare? I mean, it's a joke. Those are geniuses.
Creo que en función de todo eso es que nosotros sentimos que es un genio, porque algunas generaciones, la mía por supuesto, y mucha gente que yo conozco, gente con mucha sensibilidad, se siente profundamente influenciada por su manera de pensar, no solo por su manera de hacer comedia.
Well, you know, Noel Coward years ago spoke in his, had a song lyric or titled his autobiography, A Talent to Amuse, which is what I have. I do have a certain talent to amuse people, and over the years I've tried to utilize that in some way to say something in the work. To the degree that I'm communicating it to you and to friends of yours, that's great. I think that's, you know, nothing pleases me more than to hear that. You know, it's just that in the United States, I was just saying before, you know, genius is a thing that is tossed around very casually. Like, you know, if you were to believe the word genius in the United States, 3/4 of the people in show business are geniuses. You know, but I'm thrilled that you could go to a movie of mine and be amused by it, and also feel that there's an idea to it or an emotion to it that's worth communicating with.
Yo creo que es un poco más que eso. En realidad hemos aprendido a reírnos de nosotros mismos, que es una de las posibilidades de ser un poco menos solemnes.
It's great. I wish I could learn to laugh at myself. I only embarrass myself, you know. But it's great if that, you know, perhaps someone else seeing my work can learn to laugh at themselves because there is some objectivity to it. For me, you know, it's all humiliating all the time. You know, I've been playing the part of a fool for so many years, you know, ever since I was a child. You know, I've been, and fortunately, there's money to be made in it, you know.
Es que nadie puede imaginar ciertas tragedias vistas con tanto humor, como por ejemplo en Robó Yo y lo pescaron, que a alguien le pisen y le pisoteen sus anteojos, no solo cuando era chico, durante toda su vida. Es algo más allá de lo soportable.
Well, it's exaggerated, But, you know, the emotion's not
Yeah, yeah.
exaggerated. The actual manifest event is. But the emotion is correct, and perhaps that's what you're communicating with, is the underlying emotion, which is sincere.
En la película Manhattan, su personaje hace una lista, improvisa una lista de cosas por las que vale la pena vivir. Mencionan movimientos de una sinfonía, Groucho Marx, etcétera, etcétera. Con el correr de los años, ¿modificó esta lista? ¿Qué cosas le agregó, qué cosas le agregaría ahora? ¿Por qué vale la pena vivir?
Well, I've had to change some of the list because the Hung Fat Noodle Company has gone out of business. so you can't go there anymore. It was very interesting when I made that list, and the picture came out. The picture was very successful. I got a letter from a lady a year later saying, I saw that movie and you played the father of a little boy, and I noticed when you wrote your list on what makes life worth living, you didn't include your son. And I thought to myself, my God, I didn't, because at that time in my life, I had no children, and children to me were a convenient dramatic ploy. I needed to have the child in the movie, and I made it, and that was it. Since then, I've had children, and I can't imagine that wouldn't head the list. But that was something that I didn't know at the time. I didn't know what that feeling would be. Now, you know, that would be the number one feeling. But then, so I would change my list that way, and I would pick a different restaurant.
Woody, cuando hablaba de sus presentaciones en público, ¿había algún chiste, algún relato de los que hacía que le servía como para romper el hielo o era su preferido?
Dealt with the public, you mean as a cabaret comedian?
Sí, como un comediante, sí, cuando trabajó como comediante.
I had a very hard time making the transition because I was very shy when I was younger, and I picked the occupation that the shy person naturally gravitates to, and that is writing. And I kept alone in my room, always writing. And then, when I was in my early 20s, I seen an American comedian that I thought was great, and I thought, you know, I could do that. And it started to interest me. And I mentioned it to somebody, and that person did not let me alone after that. They kept pushing and pushing, and it was a fearful thing for me to get up on stage. I didn't like it, and it was, I used to, when I would be due on stage at 10 o'clock in the evening, I would get up 7 o'clock in the morning, nervous all day long, and it was terrible at first. And finally, I made the transition. I had certain comic routines that I wrote that were very effective for me. They're mostly things that are on my record album. And I was very successful immediately at it, in spite of not being very good. You know, I went on stage, I had no experience, and I was nervous and not good, but for some reason, there was something about me that I didn't understand, but the audience thought was funny. And after my first engagement, many cabarets called up my manager and said, we want to hire him, and they would hire me, and I would go there, and nobody would come to see me. I mean, I was... and this happened to me even after I became well-known. After I was playing cabarets for a long time, and I had a record album out, I had been on television a lot, cabaret owners would book me into their rooms, let's say in Las Vegas, and they would be all excited, and opening would come, and it would be half a house. I mean, not many people would come, and they would be embarrassed. They'd quickly start taking the big plants and moving them around so the room looked that it was not so empty, because they felt embarrassed for me. They felt bad for me. And it was a difficult time for me, and the thing that saved me was that I could write funny jokes, I suppose, and when I did them, people thought that I was funny, even though I was clumsy when I did them.
¿Podemos escuchar alguno de esos chistes divertidos?
Well, I could get you my record album. I couldn't do them for you because I haven't done them in 25 years. But I could get you my album, and you could play an excerpt from it. And these were recorded all the way back then in the 60s, and you could know exactly what I was doing and what I sounded like. That would be easy for me. but I myself have not done my routines since, you know, the early 60s. I mean, I would, if I had to do them now, I would have to go and listen to the albums and try and remember them.
¿Cuál es su relación con la industria, digamos, cinematográfica? Nosotros lo consideramos a usted un artesano del cine, escapa un poco a los cánones de la llamada industria cinematográfica, pero la industria cinematográfica lo ha premiado a usted en muchas oportunidades, o en algunas al menos. ¿Cuál es su relación con los premios? ¿Qué valor le da usted a los premios?
I don't have much of a relationship with the film industry. I live in New York. The film industry in the United States is 99% in California, 3,000 miles away. It's like another country, if you go there. And they have their own people. They communicate with their own people. I've been out of it. I have won a certain amount of awards over the years, but to me, this is not a meaningful thing. It's not meaningful for a number of reasons. First, because I don't feel that things should be in competition. Artistic things should be in competition. You know, who can say what's a better movie between, you know, Gigi and Schindler's List? You know what I mean? It just doesn't make any sense. And so I just never, and also in the United States, the awards that they give in California are campaigned for. You know, much money is spent to win them. Ads are taken in the papers. Friends call other friends and beg them to pressure people to vote for them. Yeah. Studios pressure their employees to vote. You know, it doesn't have a legitimacy, and so it doesn't really mean anything. Also, one evening, Lincoln Center in New York called me. This was 5 years ago, and they wanted to honor me on an evening. And I said, I can't come because I don't want to sit there while people are honoring me. And they said, oh, but you have to come. And I said, well, if it's a legitimate honor, then you would honor me even if I was dead or if I was someplace else. You know, if it's contingent upon me being there, it's not much of an honor. And they said, they confessed to me, well, you know, we have to sell tickets to these things, and we need to make it into some kind of an affair. And this is 90% of the honors, you know, that I come in contact with. They honor you if you come because they really want you to come to make an evening for them. You know, it's not really a legitimate honor. So I don't really care much about it. You know, also that which you can get from peers, you know, you get it when you run into them on the street. They say, I loved your last movie or something, and that's good enough. They don't have to sit you in a chair, and people dress in tuxedos, and they tell you that you're great, and they show clips from your films, and, you know,
¿Qué lugares de Nueva York nos recomendaría que viéramos para realmente conocerla antes de irnos?
Well, I would recommend that you be very careful where you go. If you really want to get to know what New York is. New York has gotten, you know, very, very dangerous. I mean, I'm still in love with New York, but it's like being in love with like an alcoholic woman or something. You know, there are wonderful restaurants in New York, and there's some good off-Broadway theater. There's some good jazz you could hear. And it's fun just to be in the streets of New York, just the ambience and the atmosphere, because when you walk in the streets, there are people from all countries. There are people from the arts, from politics. There are more art galleries in New York City, more great art in a compressed area of maybe 25 blocks than all of America put together, or the entire United States put together. So, I mean, I would recommend that you hear some jazz and that you go to some of the art galleries we have here, which are remarkable. Some of the restaurants are great. You know, but mostly the fun is just being out, going into the stores and shopping. You know, when I go to a foreign city, I don't like to go immediately to the museum or the church or something. I eventually do that, but the fun is to walk in the streets and to walk into stores and look at the people and the differences of nuance, you know. But you must be careful because New York has gone, steadily downhill. And I'm hoping that it will reverse that, but it has not in the last, actually it started to slowly go downhill after World War II, very slowly, and then it took a bigger leap, and then with the influx of drugs, took a big leap, and then with the Reagan presidency, took a bigger leap, and now it's battling, really fighting hard to remain a civilized place.
Es el psicoanalizado más famoso del mundo. Y hablando de los premios, pensaba si nunca ninguna sociedad de psicoanalistas le otorgó un premio por esta difusión que ha hecho del trabajo de ellos.
No, but I feel that I'm competent to treat people now. I've been asked to speak many times at psychoanalytic forums and symposia and things like that. I've never done it, but I have been invited to speak many times because I've been very outspoken about it over the years. I made many jokes about it and made many comments about it, but I've never won any prizes there.
Pero, ¿sigue psicoanalizándose aún en la actualidad? ¿Sigue creyendo en el psicoanálisis?
I must confess that I still do it because I've always found that it was helpful for me. Never as helpful as I'd hoped, but always tantalizing. I always feel I'm inches away from that final discovery that will suddenly turn me into a happy, well-adjusted person. And I never quite make it. It's like a work of art where you can never quite perfect it. And I've never gotten it, but it's not because I haven't tried.
No tengo la cifra exacta, pero se supone que Buenos Aires, la capital de Argentina, es uno de los lugares que tiene mayor cantidad de psicoanalistas con respecto a su población. A lo mejor hay una especie de relación con el éxito de sus películas, sin duda.
Seguramente.
Yes, I think so. I think whenever there's a large population of analysts and neurotic people, my films will have an appeal. I think it's certainly possible.
¿Esto no será un aporte como actor solamente? Y usted en la realidad, cuando se levanta todas las mañanas, se mira en el espejo y dice, soy fantástico, soy seguro, soy lo mejor del mundo. Y todo esto que nos ha hecho creer durante tantos años es una muy buena actuación.
I wish that was true. It would be great. That's not what happens. I get up in the morning and I'm not overcome with a feeling of supreme confidence. I think to myself, how am I going to get through the day? What am I going to do? It's quite the opposite. It takes me a while to get started in the morning too. I can't rev up quickly. I need to get started. So I wake up very early because I'm so driven. But it takes me a long time to get into the swing of the day. It's not that I just burst out of bed with a great confident feeling and right through it. Not at all.
También con su arte, también con sus películas, ¿tiene esa sensación de inseguridad, de temor, o es más confiado en su métier? ¿Es más seguro de lo que pretende decir, de lo que quiere lograr?
I have more confidence in my actual work than I do personally. My work is something that, for some reason, has always gone well for me for my entire life. From when I started as a young boy, it always has gone well. And so I haven't had any terrible setbacks. This is not to say I don't make a movie that people won't like or people will feel negative about. That happens, of course, but over the course of my life, I've been very lucky with my work. It's gone very well. So over many years, I do feel a confidence with it. I do feel that I can go and make a film, and there's a good chance that it will be meaningful to people. In my personal life, I don't feel that secure. My personal life is more traumatic for me. I mean, I'm not so good. You know, that's why work is an isolated thing. I go into a room in my apartment, and I write. And I'm in complete control and safe. And then when I film, I have my own technicians for many years, my own group. I'm isolated in New York. I'm not in Hollywood. And it's my own group of people, and we work quietly together. And then I go to my cutting room, which is, again, my own private space, and I work in there. And you know, it's like, when you say an artisan, it's like making shoes or something. A film is sort of like handmade. You go in and you cut the film, you paste it together. You know, it's really like making something. And then, so I feel confident about that.
Es muy fácil ver la mayor parte de sus películas como en parte autobiográficas. ¿Le ha traído muchos problemas esto de que la gente interprete que eso de usted que se ve en las películas es su propia vida?
Yes, it's a shame. You know, people that can't write or can't create have a very hard time getting their mind around an act of imagination. They can't understand that. So they think all these things must have happened to me or are all true, but they're not true. Occasionally something is true, and many times something is based on true, but very exaggerated. But they find it very hard to differentiate between me and, you know, Charlie Chaplin was a comedian who put on a mustache and a hat, and they could tell the difference. They knew that in real life, you know, he was someone who knew what he was doing, and he was an artist, and he lived a normal life, and he wasn't a tramp who was, you know, doing those things. But with me, I wear the same thing in the movie as in real life. So the difference is not so apparent to people. But the truth of the matter is, it's just as removed as Chaplin. I mean, I sit in a room and make up those stories. They're fiction. They're completely fiction most of the time. Once in a while, something will have occurred to me from my own life, but they're really fiction. And then I present it on the screen, but I look like what I look like in life. And so they think it's absolutely real. And it's caused me any number of problems over the years, you know. I remember Clark Gable saying on television that he would go into a bar and people would come up to him and say, "I don't think you're so tough," and they would pick fights with him because they can't differentiate between the off-screen character and the on-screen character. And this has been a particular problem of mine over the years.
Creo que nos sentimos en este momento nosotros el placer de estar en esta conversación. Me permite darme un gusto. Me gustaría saber, si es posible, ¿qué recuerdo, qué sensación tiene usted de haber estado con Groucho? De haber podido hablar con Groucho, de haber podido compartir conversaciones y tenerlo acá, face to face.
It was very interesting because I grew up idolizing Groucho Marx, and then I met him one day and eventually became friends with him, and we became quite good friends, actually. But when I first met him, he seemed to me like every Jewish uncle in my family, just kind of like a, you know, a sarcastic. I mean, in my family, there are a dime a dozen. If you go to any wedding or funeral or bar mitzvah or anything, there's 20 Jewish uncles, and they all have the nasty, comic, nasty remarks to make, and they're all kind of funny a little bit, and they're full of sarcasm. And Groucho was exactly that. Now, he was it to an artistic level, but that's what he was. And I remember sitting opposite him in a restaurant thinking, gee, is this what my life, you know, he was an old man at the time, and I thought, is this what my life is going to be, that I'm going to be, at best, if I'm lucky enough to achieve what Groucho achieved, which is a miracle, that I'm going to be just a kind of sarcastic old Jewish uncle, not different than my own uncles. And you know, I'll start to get old, I'll have the glasses, be bald and hunched over, and making the nasty remarks, you know, and it was a depressing thing. And I got to be friends with him and found him to be, you know, a wonderful, wonderful person. He was like, to me, like Picasso in the sense that, you know, when Picasso just draws something, just one line, it's full of feeling. You know, if I draw the line, it's nothing. But if he draws it, and when Groucho said something, it was full of comic feeling. It didn't have to be even something that was funny, but there was something in the sound of his voice and the rhythm, intangible.
Algo similar siento que ocurre con usted. Sí. Una manera de decir, una forma distinta, totalmente distinta de rematar gags o chistes que la de Groucho, pero hay un sentimiento del humor, hay un humor puesto, digamos, de la piel para afuera, que uno lo percibe, lo huele, y todo es agradable.
Well, thank you. I think that I'm probably a little derivative of him to a degree, and I used to say this, and people always laughed and thought that I was joking. Groucho does resemble my mother. And there was a family resemblance there, and he could be a member of my family. I mean, he could be my mother's brother, you know, perfectly. I mean, it would be no problem at all. And I felt very at home with him, and I'm sure I've derived some part of my personality from him. Also from Bob Hope, who's a comedian that outside of the United States I don't think is very popular or very well known. Here in the United States... Is he? Well, he's someone that made a number of movies years ago that were quite funny. And then in the 50s, he went on to television, and his work for the last years has not been good at all. And so whenever I tell young people how good he is, they always look at me and think, you know, they only know him from television. They think he's very, very terrible. But if you look at his early movies, he was wonderfully, wonderfully gifted.
Primeras películas.
Yes, the early films were absolutely wonderful.
En la Argentina hay una gran cultura de revisionismo cinematográfico. Gusta mucho la gente, hay generaciones enteras que se dedican a ver películas 30 y 40 veces porque las amamos.
Yes, that used to be here too. I think it's starting again, but there used to be in New York City many revival houses. And you could go anywhere and see old movies and foreign movies. And gradually, because of television, it became less and less and less and less. Now, it's starting to come back a little bit.
Vamos a cambiar el tema y le quería preguntar, hay muchos hombres que piensan que las mujeres estamos muy peligrosas. Me gustaría que piensa sobre el caso Lorena Bobbitt.
Well, what can one say about that? I didn't think that... I thought that she should not get off unscathed. I have great sympathy for her, but it sends a bad message. You know, I think that you can't, no matter how justified one can't take the law into one's own hands, because if it's good for her, it's good for many men and women to, you know, in justifiable circumstances, to act as the law themselves.
Pero a partir de eso hubo un enorme miedo masculino hacia las mujeres, como si de pronto descubrieran que las mujeres tienen el poder de mutilarlos o de hacerles algún daño. ¿Qué piensa usted, no del caso específico de Lorena Bobbitt, sino de la mujer en general en su relación con el hombre hoy?
Well, I think men have always been afraid of women, always. I always think that they were afraid of women's sexuality and always kept them very pure and very controlled because they're overwhelmed by their inability to deal with female sexuality because it's so different than male sexuality. And so over the years, or in recent years I should say, I think that's going to be less and less as women have become more assertive and more open, all just the mere subject of women's sexuality is no longer a forbidden topic of conversation, but it's something that women talk about, and women expect the same sexual pleasure as men, and the whole situation can now be dealt with in an honest way. And I think the fear of women will lessen. There'll be a certain amount of knee-jerk competition at first, and a certain amount of die-hard men that will always have to deny women their proper place. But I think that will be less and less. I think that it's moving the other way, that men always used to be frightened of women and would deal with that fear in all kinds of artificial ways. And so it was terrible for men and terrible for women, and the relations between them were always artificial, and I think that we're standing on the verge of an era where relations between men and women can be much more honest and actually better. And I think men will stop fearing them and will deal with them, you know, as equal human beings, but not to be feared, not mysterious. You know, there's something so mysterious about female sexuality to men. They just have never understood it, and never, you know, always had fantasies of women, you know, in the most absurd ways. You can see that from the pornography, and you can see how they think of women. And I think that's all going to change for the better with a new openness that has emerged since the 60s.
Es raro que Selig, este personaje que era una especie de camaleón que se parecía a todo lo que se le acercaba, nunca se transformaba en una mujer, aún estando con mujeres.
No, for some reason that just never occurred. You know, it just never occurred to me. It would have been an interesting idea, but the thought just never crossed my mind. I don't know for what psychological reason it didn't, but it did. I thought of him changing to any other thing, but it never occurred to me that there would be a change of sex.
Quizá porque tenía que enamorarse de su terapeuta. Tenía que mantener distancia para poder enamorarse.
No, podía ser lesbiana.
It probably would have led to big problems if he had a sex change. I mean, it would have been a different movie. But, you know, maybe interesting. I mean, maybe that would have been funny in a certain way.
Si Woody cree en la felicidad, si es un hombre feliz, si se puede definir como un hombre feliz, o qué es para usted la felicidad.
To me, happiness is distraction. You know, I always feel that no matter how much we try and sugarcoat it or avoid it, the world in general, existence in general, is a very tough road. Yeah. It's a very difficult, fraught. We're born, we don't know why, we get old, we die, we get sick, our terrible things happen to us, our loved ones, everything is impermanent and transitory, nobody ever knows what hit them, and so the only happy times you can have is when you can distract yourself, when you don't face reality too squarely. You know, Freud, Eugene O'Neill, Nietzsche, all felt that too much reality, you couldn't live with too much reality, and I can see where that would be very, very true. And so in order to be happy, if you can distract yourself, now most people distract themselves with the little chores of life, you know, and you set up for yourself problems that you can solve, and so you feel good solving them. You know, when I'm working on the second act of a play and I'm whining and complaining, oh, it's so difficult and it's so hard, but I can deal with it. But it keeps me from facing the problems that you can't really solve in life. And if you sit around and start to think about them and think what life really is and what you're really in for, it's very unpleasant. So the most happiness I think you can get is to remain distracted.
Yeah.
And to the degree that you can pick healthy distractions, it's good. If the distractions are, you know, television or marijuana or, you know, I mean, you know, it's destructive. But to the degree that you can pick a constructive distraction, it helps.
¿A quién de su entorno cercano usted quería impresionar, en cierta manera agasajar, cuando tuvo sus primeros éxitos? ¿Buscaba la aprobación de su madre, de su padre, de esas tías, de esas primas? ¿Con quién se sentía bien cuando decían muy bien, Buddy, has triunfado?
I'm very shallow. When I started, I didn't even let my parents come and see me. It was so embarrassing for me to do what I was doing. I didn't even want them to see me. When I first started, who I wanted to impress were intellectuals.
¿Sí?
And as I say, I'm shallow. Over the years, I began to see that that was a shallow aspiration. But when I first started, that was meaningful to me. I don't know why. It may be, you know, because I grew up in a kind of Jewish family where the implicit values of the family that are given to you are toward intellectuals, toward writers, toward doctors, toward people that learn. That's the only thing I can think of, because I certainly have never been an intellectual and have never, you know, I don't lead an intellectual life. But for some reason, when I started in my early 20s, nothing pleased me more than to be elitist in my response. If the audience was intelligent, I love to go to universities and or play concerts for very educated people. This is a very important thing for me.
Alguien dice que las dos grandes experiencias del hombre no las puede contar, que es el nacer y el morir.
Right. I myself have a terrible fear of you know, I have never been able to make any kind of peace with that. I have a terrible fear of that. It's not intellectual. It's strictly, you know, it's strictly each of us has a will to live and a will to power and a will to keep going on. And I've never been able. I wish I could do. I wish. Sometimes I meet people and they say they have no problem with that. They have a peaceful life. They accept the fact, you know, maybe they're religious and it works for them or something. I don't see any positive side to it myself.
Mi único temor es que alguien de toda la gente que nos está viendo, que va a tener la suerte de poder verlo a través de este programa, piense, qué lástima, si yo hubiese estado sentado ahí, me hubiese gustado preguntarle o decirle tal cosa. Creo que si existe esa posibilidad, yo reuniría un sentimiento más que una pregunta. Yo realmente me gustaría hacerle saber que hay mucha gente en nuestro país que realmente lo quiere y lo respeta mucho.
It's great for me to hear that, because I've never been to Argentina, and I don't know if I should ever go because I don't want to spoil anything.
Si usted fuera a Argentina, sentiría que es un lugar absolutamente familiar para usted.
I'm sure. I hear that it's you know, a wonderful big cosmopolitan, you know, Buenos Aires, anyhow, a wonderful cosmopolitan atmosphere of the kind that I like. Maybe someday I will get the nerve to come, but I don't want to destroy the illusions of the people of Argentina by showing up in person.
Queremos decirle que ha sido un placer muy grande estar con usted, conocerlo. Estamos muy nerviosos. Hemos conocido a una persona inteligente, brillante,
que nos ha facilitado
divina,
la tarea.
Más joven y más rubia que en las películas
sí,
también.
divino, ella I love you. Y que muchas
Thank you very
gracias.
much. I'm not younger, but when I did Don't Drink the Water, they had to give me a haircut. And so I'm looking younger this week, but in 2 more weeks, you know, I will look
Qué
old.
divino. Gracias. Thank you very much.
Thank you.